Welcome back to the channel for another explainer. Medicos, listen up. If you're prepping for the wards or cramming for those upcoming board exams, you're in the exact right place today. We're bringing you the ultimate high-yield guide to the body's metabolic extremes, hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism. We are going to decode exactly how these conditions present, how you can reliably diagnose them without falling into those super common clinical traps, and exactly how to manage them like an absolute pro.
But before we get into the heavy pathology, let's just start with a fundamental physiological question to set the stage for everything we're about to talk about. So, what controls the metabolic pace of literally every single cell in your body? The answer? Yep, it's that little butterfly-shaped thyroid gland sitting right there in your anterior neck. Think of the thyroid as your body's master thermostat playing a high-stakes game of fire versus ice. See, when there's way too much thyroid hormone, the body basically turns into a furnace. You get high heat, a racing heart rate, and massive metabolic output. That's the fire. But when there's too little hormone, the body turns to ice. Low heat, a sluggish heart rate, and drastically reduced cellular output. Seriously, every single clinical sign and symptom we're going to discuss today traces directly back to this one foundational concept.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to systematically cover the master thermostat, fire and ice symptoms, the diagnostic gatekeeper, autoimmune overdrive and destruction, pharmacology and clinical pitfalls, and finally wrap up with endocrine emergencies. Let's dive right in. Okay, part 1, the master thermostat and navigating the HPT axis.
Let's look at the normal state first. The hypothalamus releases TRH, which basically knocks on the pituitary's door to release TSH. That stimulates the thyroid to make T4 and T3, which beautifully maintains a balanced basal metabolic rate. But what happens in autonomous overproduction, like with Graves' disease? The thyroid goes rogue. It's just churning out massive amounts of T3 and T4 completely on its own. That excess hormone feeds back to the brain, completely suppressing TRH and pushing your TSH to undetectable levels. Your patient is in total metabolic overdrive. Now flip that. If the thyroid gland is failing and destroyed, say in Hashimoto's, T4 and T3 production plummet. The brain panics, right? The pituitary starts literally screaming at the thyroid, which gives you a markedly elevated compensatory TSH. But the damaged gland, it just can't respond. Moving right along to part 2, fire and ice symptoms. What does this actually look like in the clinic? Before we look at the whole body, we've got to talk about the heart, because this is usually what lands your patient in the ER in the first place. In hyperthyroidism, the heart is absolutely racing. You're going to see tachycardia, and this is crucial. Atrial fibrillation happens in over 10% of these patients, especially in the elderly. Now compare that to hypothyroidism. The cardiovascular system is incredibly sluggish, presenting with a really slow pulse and marked bradycardia. Now check out the stark contrast across every organ system in this master symptom matrix. You might actually want to pause the video just to study this for a second. Look at body weight. It drops in hyperthyroidism because of high catabolism, but it increases in hypothyroidism due to low anabolism. GI motility speeds up, causing frequent stools in the hyperstate, but slows to a halt, causing severe constipation in the hypostate. But pay special attention to the physical exams here. If you test the deep tendon reflexes of a hyperthyroid patient, they are super brisk and hyperreflexic, and they'll usually have a fine tremor. You can actually test that tremor by just placing a sheet of paper right over their outstretched hands. On the flip side, the hung-up, delayed reflexes in a hypothyroid patient are literally like watching a body in slow motion. It is a complete systemic mirror image. But here's the catch, guys. Relying on these symptoms alone, huge clinical trap. They overlap with countless other conditions, which brings us perfectly to objective testing. Which brings us to part 3, the diagnostic gatekeeper. Let's talk laboratory logic. I want you to burn this algorithm into your brain. Step 1, always check the TSH first. It is hands down the single most sensitive screening test we have. If that TSH is abnormal, then you move to step 2, checking the free T4 to gauge the actual severity of the disease. And notice I said free T4, never total T4. Make sense? Good. Once you've confirmed their metabolic state, you move to step 3, checking specific antibodies to find the underlying cause. And finally, step 4, your targeted workup, like an uptake scan or a lipid panel. So here's the exact laboratory picture you're going to see. As you'd expect, hyperthyroidism gives you a suppressed TSH and high free T4. while hypothyroidism shows an elevated TSH and low free T4. But look closely at the nuances here, because these are highly testable. In hypothyroidism, LDL cholesterol is actually low because all that excess T3 clears it rapidly, while ALP is elevated due to bone loss from stimulated osteoclasts. In hypothyroidism, LDL is high, which leads to some pretty significant cardiovascular risk over time. Also, check out that clinical pearl at the bottom. Early hyperthyroidism might present as T3 toxicosis, where the free T4 is completely normal, but the free T3 is elevated. Always remember to check free T3 if your clinical suspicion is high, but that T4 comes back totally normal.
All right, let's shift gears to part 4, autoimmune overdrive and destruction. We're pitting Graves against Hashimoto's. First up is Graves' disease. This is your ultimate autoimmune overdrive. Focus on the cellular mechanism here. The body produces TRAb, which are TSH receptor-stimulating antibodies. These rogue antibodies bind directly to the TSH receptors on the follicular cells, completely bypassing the pituitary's control, and just force the continuous autonomous overproduction of T4 and T3. Clinically, you absolutely must know the classic triad: a smooth, diffuse goiter, exophthalmos, which is that bilateral bulging of the eyes you'll see in about 50% of patients, and pretibial myxedema on the shins. Also, a quick warning here. And if a patient has active moderate to severe thyroid eye disease, giving them radioactive iodine is strictly contraindicated. Why? Because it can acutely worsen their vision, and you definitely don't want that. On the flip side, Hashimoto's thyroiditis is all about autoimmune destruction. Notice that dense lymphocytic infiltration and the pink Hürthl cells in the histology. That is your CD8 plus T cell destruction of the follicular cells, which is heavily amplified by anti-TPO antibodies. Now, look at the comparison table. Sometimes as those follicles are initially being destroyed, they just dump all their stored hormone into the blood all at once, causing a transient hyperthyroid phase called hashitoxicosis. Please do not confuse this with Graves. Hashitoxicosis is totally transient, it's TRAb negative, and it has low iodine uptake. Because remember, the gland isn't actually overproducing, it's literally just spilling its guts while it dies. That brings us to part 5, pharmacology and clinical pitfalls. The cardinal rule: do no harm. Listen, I want to vigorously warn you against these 4 highly tested, incredibly common mistakes. Number 1, diagnosing on symptoms alone. Treating a patient's anxiety or weight loss as a pure psychiatric issue without even checking a TSH, massive red flag. Number 2, giving radioactive iodine blindly to Graves patients without a mandatory ophthalmology assessment. Like we just talked about, you could literally threaten their sight. Number 3, diagnosing hyperthyroidism based on a high total T4 in a pregnant woman. Pregnancy naturally raises thyroid-binding globulin, right? So that falsely elevates total T4, always used for T4. And number 4, keeping a hypothyroid woman on her standard pre-pregnancy levothyroxine dose. This is a critical error, and we'll see why in a second. So how do we actually treat these folks? It really boils down to one concept: suppress versus replace. For hyperthyroidism, we suppress. Carbimazole or methimazole are your absolute first line. They block the TPO enzyme. But you must warn your patients about a granulocytosis. If they suddenly get a fever or sore throat, they need to stop the drug immediately and get to an ER for a white blood cell count. PTU is your alternative that blocks peripheral T4 to T3 conversion, but just know it carries a higher hepatotoxicity risk. For hypothyroidism, we replace. We use levothyroxine, which is synthetic T4. The absolute golden rule here is how they take it. It must be taken on an empty stomach, 30 to 60 minutes before breakfast, and separated from things like calcium, iron, or PPIs by at least 4 hours. Seriously, if they take it with their morning coffee and a PPI, they might as well just throw the pill in the trash. And we absolutely have to talk about pregnancy, because this timeline is incredibly high yield for exams in real life. If your hyperthyroid patient gets pregnant, PTU is actually preferred in trimester 1. Why? To avoid methimazole-induced birth defects like aplasia cutis. But once they hit trimester 2 and 3, you switch them right back to carbimazole to minimize that maternal hepatotoxicity risk from the PTU. Now, for our hypothyroid patients who become pregnant, you must increase their levothyroxine dose by 30 to 50% immediately upon confirming the pregnancy. The fetus relies entirely on maternal thyroid hormone for its neurodevelopment early on. If you miss this adjustment, you literally risk permanent impaired fetal brain development. It's that serious. Finally, we're at part 6, endocrine emergencies. These are your massive red flags. Knowing this protocol could quite literally save a life on the wards. We've got thyroid storm, the hyperthyroid crisis. It's usually triggered by things like an infection, a surgery, or a massive iodine load.
These patients are going to present with a super high fever over 38.5 Celsius, atrial fibrillation, severe agitation, and a Birch-Wertofsky score of 45 or higher. Management here is highly sequential. PTU first to block new synthesis, then potassium iodide about an hour later to block release, followed up with propranolol and dexamethasone. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have Myxedema coma, the hypothyroid crisis, triggered by cold exposure, or maybe they just stopped taking their meds. These patients are hypothermic, severely bradycardic, and hypoventilating. You have to treat this aggressively with IV T4 and T3 loading doses, plus IV hydrocortisone to cover any potential adrenal insufficiency, all while doing some very gentle passive rewarming. Now, for our medicos practicing or testing in the Indian subcontinent, context is absolutely everything. Remember that India's 1992 National Iodine Deficiency Disorders Control Program mandated universally iodized salt, which just drastically dropped the prevalence of endemic goiters. And because of this new iodine sufficiency in urban areas, Hashimoto's has actually taken over as the leading cause of hypothyroidism there. Also, it's worth noting that carbimazole is the standard, highly affordable hyperthyroid drug on the market there, while levothyroxine is heavily subsidized under their essential medicines lists.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's too much versus too little. Graves versus Hashimoto's. The blazing fire of T3 versus the freezing ice of a failing gland. Your entire job as a clinician is to basically act as the mechanic for that master thermostat. You need to recognize the systemic symptoms, let the TSH be your ultimate diagnostic gatekeeper, and carefully, safely balance those scales to restore your patient's metabolic health. Never miss either extreme.
But wait, that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. You know exactly how to manage the function of the thyroid thermostat now, right? But what do you do if you palpate the neck and find a hard, painless nodule? How do you know if it's completely benign or if it's cancer? Well, that is an entirely different diagnostic pathway, and it's exactly what we're going to decode next time. Keep studying, always trust the labs, and I will see you in the next explainer.